You can raise $1 billion for your first round? Wait, what? That's just insane. I mean, how does that make sense?
CEO and co-founder of Orchid Labs, former partner at Pantera Capital, and co-founder of RPX.
Dr. Stephen Waterhouse, better known as Seven.
A driving force in blockchain and internet privacy, founder of Nazare Ventures, backing AI infrastructure, and building what's next.
The way these systems work is they're just trying to predict the next set of words. That's all it is. I think we're entering into some kind of uncanny valley moment where you know it's not real, you know it's a bunch of weights predicting things, but it doesn't matter.
What's the most overhyped idea in AI at the moment?
I think agents are overhyped. They're like overhyped short term and underhyped long term. I think they will be fundamentally transformative to the way that companies operate, but currently they're not going to live up to their promise.
5 years from now, what do you think will feel obvious in hindsight?
I think that
Hey, Sohejl here. Thanks for tuning in. Real quick before we begin, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, please consider to follow or subscribe or share this episode. That helps us out a lot. It helps us to reach more people and to spread quality education across the space about crypto and Web3. Also, if you're part of a crypto project or represent one and you would like to come on the show or do sponsoring, please get in touch with us. And lastly, everything we talk about today is for educational purposes and no financial advice. Enjoy the show. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the TEACHMEDEFI Podcast. Today, we'll dive into AI as we have a few times now recently. And we got the guest for that on the show today, Stephen Waterhouse. Hey, mate. Thank you for coming on the show.
thank you. Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. We got a sunny day finally in Germany. So, spirits are high. How about you?
Things are great, yeah. It's also very sunny here in Lisbon, and looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, well, it's always sunny there. So it's a good place for crypto as well, or there's a lot of projects and crypto people around there.
Lots of people, especially in DeFi, are based in Portugal and have been based in Portugal for the last 4 or 5 years now.
Okay. Sweet. I mean, yeah, I think you have had welcome to the show first of all, and you've had quite the career in tech. I mean, from early machine learning to Sun Microsystems to crypto and now AI. How did you come up with the idea for? I don't know if I say it correctly. Nazar.
It's Nazare.
Nazare?
There should be an acute on an accent on the E. Nazare is the name of a town northwest of Lisbon on the coast, which has the world's largest surfable waves. So if you know anything about big wave surfing, that's where the biggest waves in the world are. And so it's rather like a kind of a corny meme in the sense that we think that AI is the largest wave of innovation and will drive largest waves of innovation. And so we're trying to surf that wave and not die doing it. The inspiration for this idea was I did my PhD in what's now called AI, so neural networks for speech recognition at Cambridge in the early 90s to the late 90s. And it was really not my first love in tech. I just thought this was the idea of teaching computers what I thought at the time was like how to think, how to like follow all the kind of science fiction ideas that had come along at this time was just a really fascinating concept. And I followed that after graduating at Cambridge. I moved to San Francisco and then started working for NASA as a contractor, working again on AI models for the kind of big data problems they had. At the same time, a whole bunch of data was being created on the internet. And so the team that I had, this little startup, started working on personalization technologies and recommendation technologies, things that became kind of a big deal at that time. After the dot-com crash, I started realizing that the majority of the sort of really commercial opportunities in AI at that point were going to be around e-commerce and advertising, which wasn't such an interesting area to me. I wanted to do something different with my time than work on advertising. That led me to work on distributed systems, which led to a whole bunch of other choices in my careers that long story led to starting up the digital currency team at Fortress in combination with Pete Brigger and Mike Novogratz and then Dan Moorhead, and then spinning that out into a new fund at Pantera in early 2013, where I was a co-founder. A few years later, started my own crypto project called Orchid Labs, which is a decentralized VPN. And then a couple of years ago, returned to AI, really like a lot of people fascinated by what was happening with sort of stable diffusion and the early ChatGPT models. And what I saw then was that suddenly AI had returned to this very human enhancing, like human enabling technology. I think of a lot of the uses of it in e-commerce and advertising are very sort of antithetical to the way I see systems and their utility. But the agentic frameworks, the idea that we're going to build super intelligences presented just this very unique opportunity. So what Nazare is focused on is the idea of looking at the current kind of compute stack that exists for AI, which is very concentrated into these very large clusters, like the Hopper clusters and soon to be the Blackwell clusters, and the really steep price of building a new frontier model. And you were just talking about some of the work you're doing in these areas as well. What I see emerging is a continuum of compute from the very large clusters all the way down to the edge devices. So it's not a question of decentralized AI versus centralized AI. It's actually like, how do you take the technologies and the innovations that are going to be necessary to essentially access compute at all different layers, whether it's everything from a phone to a Blackwell cluster, whether that's distributed technologies or decentralized technologies, and developing the software ecosystem and training architectures, inference, data generation, marshaling of resources, management of these systems, agentic architectures. There's a whole framework of tools in there that span the worlds of Web 2 and Web 3, traditional AI and decentralized AI. And that's kind of where we sit in the middle of this kind of focusing on that area. We've done 9 investments so far from our first fund, and they span everything from companies like Vast AI, which is it's not a crypto company. It's the decentralized GPU platform that people can essentially put their GPUs up online for rent, and developers can use the systems just as they would use a normal compute cloud. We recently invested in Intelligent Internet, which is Ahmad from Stability AI's new deal. So that's like a sort of fully decentralized, community-owned data models and algorithms and compute. So we're looking at a lot of different things in between, whether it's zero knowledge proofs, fully homomorphic encryption, different ideas in there. So that's our sweet spot.
Mm, interesting. All right, quite the journey. You mentioned Pantera, and that was pretty early on. So did you start one of the first funds at Pantera, or what was the story?
So Dan, who's the founder and CEO of Pantera, he could run it as a global macro fund until 2008, and then in 2013, and I believe it may have continued for a year or two after that. But in 2013, he kind of took it out of its current form and built up this digital currency framework. So we started investing in Bitcoin, and then during my time we did 2 venture funds focusing on the ecosystem around Bitcoin, and then eventually other currencies and other frameworks as Ethereum and other protocols started happening. So we, for example, led the first institutional round into Zcash. We did the first round in Brave, Civic, Circle. I was on the board of Bitstamp, where we were the only investor. Yeah, so we did a lot of things. We're busy.
Wow, all over the place. Yeah, keep him
Yeah.
busy. Yeah. Um, what does it feel like? You've been involved in AI or back then neural networks, machine learning so early on. What does it feel like to see the rapid growth that's happening now?
So back in the late 90s, we were doing um, large vocabulary automatic speech recognition. So the stuff that you now kind of take for granted was this was really the first applications of this at scale. And at the time, there were two competing architectures. One was based on hidden Markov models, which is a different kind of machine learning approach. And then there was our approach, which is based on recurrent neural networks. And I developed a framework around mixes of experts. And the the fascinating thing was to see these systems absorb data, and then we'd increase the model size and just try and build as big as we could in the data. Same kind of ideas, many, many years later, and watch them just produce incredible results without really a lot of tuning. And so the hidden Markov model approach required a lot of kind of craftiness to where you built it. The neural networks are just slam data and built models. And I think that spirit of it has come through to now where you've got systems that have like half a trillion weights, half trillion parameters. I am still, I still catch myself because I was actually trying to explain to my partner. And I was saying to her, like, the way these systems work is they're just trying to predict the next set of words. That's all it is. And she's like, yeah, but there must be something else in there. I was like, no, it's just like literally predicting the next set of words. It's just got this big context window. The bigger the context window, the more the weights, the more the data, the better it gets. But you have to remind yourself of that every so often because it feels intelligent. And and I and I and I know what's going on. I mean, and it's like, this is weird, that kind of moment where I think we're entering into some kind of uncanny valley moment where it's not real, it's not intelligent, it's a bunch of weights predicting things, but it doesn't matter. I don't know. So humbling, I guess, would be one word to describe it. It's really astonishing.
Yeah, I think Naval said it's a different kind of intelligence. I think it would be wrong to say. I don't know how you view it, but to think that we're headed with the current paradigm towards general intelligence, adding more compute to it. But like you said, it doesn't seem like it's just predicting the next word often. But when you try and probe it a bit, and I think David Deutsch made the point of like he wanted it to paint a picture, and then he was saying, okay, now make that person be seated that was standing. I think it was a Greek philosopher or whatever. And it couldn't do that, right? Whereas if you would tell that to the worst artist, worst human artist, he would understand that
I
and do it.
I agree, but that was true 6 months ago. The new image model will do it. So, this is what it reminds me in a weird way a little bit of the early internet. I know I probably date myself talking about this, but the early web, people don't realize that there was so many critiques of the internet and the web. Even as late as like 99, 2000, most people thought it was just silly. Like, what's the point? I can write a letter, I can call someone up. Like, I don't get it. Like, we have fax machines and so on. I can buy things in the store. Like, I have mail order. Like, all the arguments against why what seemed so obviously incredibly useful to those of us doing it. Um, and then in the period after that, if you were working in the internet, people would come up and say, "Hey, is your friend okay? Because like he's still working on the internet. Like, doesn't he know it's over? Right? It's just not working." Um, yeah, for crypto and then for AI. So the early AI systems, everyone's like, "Oh, it just hallucinates, so it's not creative, or it doesn't do this, or it doesn't do that." And then that comment about the image models is true. And 6 months ago, that was correct. But now the new OpenAI image model, the new Midjourney, you can prompt it to change the same thing. You can say, "Okay, I want that picture of me." You take a picture of me, it'll look at a picture of me, and I'll say, "Okay, take my glasses off." Okay, now I want a suit. Same picture, does the exact same thing. It doesn't recreate it from scratch. It like adapts the one it has. And I think that I think we're actually underestimating the capabilities. And um and I would agree with the kind of comments like Naval and other people make is that it's maybe a form of intelligence and an automation that we're not quite understanding yet, and that's fair because we're not going to understand it until um, it's much later in this evolution. Like where it's useful, how we got to use it. Um, what's certainly true is that um, just like I've seen with crypto and other industries, and and still somewhat with crypto, but there's sort of movements to different edges now. Um, you've got the smartest people in the world trying to figure these things out and going and starting companies, doing research, thinking about it, talking about it. And to me, that's what I've always wanted to be, is just on those edges where it's kind of weird. It's fascinating. You're not quite sure what's going to happen next, but whoa, you've got the smartest people you could ever want to talk to trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's what I always say. I mean, it's not inherently a bad thing that there are a lot of problems. In fact, it's good that there are a lot of problems because then there's incentives to solve them and you
Hmm.
have people working on it.
You got the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but cycling back to kind of like the general intelligence point, um, I mean, creating new knowledge is inherently disobedient, right? Like it's very linked to disobedience because you create knowledge that's in contrast to what people thought to be true so far.
Yeah.
Um, so and I don't see that with AI, right? It's inherent. It's essentially obedient. It's doing what you want. I mean, if you would even get an AI model that perhaps would get close to general intelligence and would be disobedient, we would probably never hear about it because it would get tossed in the trash by OpenAI, right?
Mm.
What do you think about that?
Well, so
Because
the so
yeah, the question
the,
is there real creativity to generate actual new knowledge? And as creativity is kind of linked to being disobedient and
yeah,
yeah.
let's take that point for a second. So I think that having done a PhD and spent a little bit of time in academia and post the PhD, I didn't do postdoc, but um, the work at NASA and the work we did with the first company was very much like that. Thing you start understanding is that um, the the process of research is really trying to synthesize and understand what's happened already, and then take that ball and move it a little bit further, right? And then every so often, there's a, you know, there's kind of like a genius comes along. We call them geniuses, and what they do is they take the ball and they go, "Yeah, I'm just not going to play with this ball. I do something else," right? But they still understand what's happened before, because in order to do something new, you need to know what's not new, right? You need to know, like, okay, everything. To understand the state of the art of the field. So what we're doing with large language models is we're creating systems that are state of the art understanding models. So in every discipline now, they have state of the art understanding. And if they don't, it's because they haven't had all the data. And so that, we're slowly fixing that. So suddenly you have a system that has state of the art, not just in one subject, but state of the art in every subject, right? Now, if you look through to, say, the Crick and Watson innovations around the double helix for the DNA structure, those guys were physicists that came to biology, and they brought their understanding of physical and atomic structures to biology, which hadn't been really exposed to people thinking that way before up until this point. So their ability to synthesize knowledge from another discipline at state of the art and bring it to biology enabled them to get this instinct. So I'm I'm hopeful that what we'll see is not necessarily creative innovation by models on their own, but the prompting and the enhancement of a researcher in, I don't know, like sort of some say material science, that because the model has the understanding of all other disciplines and the state of the art of them, it can then say, well, hang on, if you look at this like this, what happens? Or can you bring some innovations from these other areas that you might want to help me with? Um, I'm curious, however, as I say this, because the process of like this test time compute and the kind of the recursive nature of reasoning models may get us to the point where, based on the help of sometimes people call these centaur models as like the kind of human horse hybrid kind of thing, as this human AI hybrid. Maybe you'll see more creativity than we necessarily give it credit for. So when you set a deep research task on an OpenAI, there's a certain amount of creativity happening. It's exploring this, exploring that, it's trying that, it's pivoting, it's changing its mind. How do you define creativity? I don't know. I guess the creation of something very new. Essentially it's creating new things all the time, and down to our prompts. So I think the ball is we're moving the ball all the time as to what we define as creative or intelligent or otherwise. And that's fascinating, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, incredible tools, right? I'm just trying to dissect a bit of the bold statements that sometimes are made, or some people call it even super intelligence, something that would be beyond general intelligence, which like kind of like the knowledge that I subscribe to more doesn't align with that, because like humans are universal computers, and I think what you could have that's better than that has more memory and or compute, but you could enhance humans like that as well, essentially. Um, but yeah, I mean, because like creating new knowledge is essentially not just recombination of what's out there already, right? So, for example, Einstein didn't come up with didn't recombine knowledge. The knowledge and the theory of relativity wasn't already there before him, where he had to recombine it. He genuinely created that, right? So I think that's the question, if AI could do that, or like some of the points that I heard you mention, or how I interpreted them, is like that it can enhance the human working on problems, right? So, for example, having the AI do some research, and perhaps because the AI might have more knowledge on a certain topic on this database, and you can query it and then get some insights from that, which trigger some new creative thoughts that goes you approach the topic from a different perspective.
I mostly agree with you. Yeah, I'd say that's a good characterization of how I think about it. Um, I I think that, I mean, it's sort of like a philosophical question in the end. Is what is what is creativity? What is the creation of something new? Is that possible within these systems that we have? What is what is unique in the it, it's like a watered down version of this question of, if you could create a computer that simulated you completely, and as just as smart, just reacted in the same way, does it have a soul? Is it intelligent? Does it have consciousness, right? And this is like a sort of a watered down version of that. It's like to say, well, can these systems that we're creating right now show real creativity, or are they just sort of recycling the data that we already have? And to some extent, like, are those two things the same? Or are they different? Did Einstein come up with something very new, or did he actually synthesize a lot of information that was there before and come up with the obvious next step if you actually understood everything? So was his skill in understanding everything and then seeing the next step? And I'd argue, having done a bunch of my own research and other researcher, and then also understanding that from a startup concept as well. So the process of starting companies and also investing in companies, I consider very similar to the process of doing academic research, because you got to understand the space, you got to understand the opportunities, you got to understand like which areas to go after, which are commercially interesting, which are not commercially interesting, which is, similar in academics. It's like, who cares? Is it important to figure this out or not? Right. So, and these kind of fundamental processes and thinking processes, I think that philosophers are going to have a lot of fun in the next few years, right? trying to trying to unwrap these kind of ideas. Is like, I don't know. And the fact you talk about David Deutsch, and the fact that Naval's got such a platform to talk about philosophy is wild, right? like, who knew that philosophers were suddenly going to become this hot new thing? But people love to have good philosophers on podcasts now because they they have such a voice, and people want to hear this kind of thinking process.
I think AI is amplifying authenticity. Like authenticity, the value of authenticity is increased because you can now generate, you know, like a post that sounds thought provoking with AI. So like anyone can now kind of create a lot of that, but like the value of genuine human authenticity has increased, I believe, and through podcasts, it is like if you do it like a genuine exchange, I feel that's why it resonates with people because they can just listen to a honest conversation as opposed to maybe a scripted or run of the mill type thing.
I think so too. I think I think there's another funny aspect to this, which is whenever I get on stage or whenever I get into a podcast environment, or especially on stage, I just remember that I'm the entertainment. Like, I'm here to entertain you. We both are. I mean, you're my, like, you're the guy to set me up, but I'm here to, like, provide the gig, provide the laughs, provide the controversy. Um, and I think that we're all training ourselves more and more to realize that whether it's in a micro version of that with your own Instagram feed or Twitter feed, um, or all the way through to people doing TED Talks, or all the way through to politicians, is that what's becoming commercial is, or sort of what's celebrated, is the shock value, right? You got to, like, get out there and, like, make a big noise and make a big shock and so on. Just generic content or kind of having the same view as someone else is like, oh no, that's not interesting. I want to hear, like, something controversial. Um, and that's what you see people engage with. And so we are being trained to be more original, more controversial, more dramatic, right? Which is an interesting place to be. We're all becoming sort of stars of our own reality TV show.
Yeah, and maybe AI can soon generate some TV shows that are based on our own lives. I mean, the whole what did we have recently? The kind of the Ghiblification of images that we had recently. I mean, that was impressive, and I feel like we could get to a point where you could have feed your pictures of the last year in there, and it'll create a little anime of you and your last year, which you can watch with your significant other.
Exactly. Yeah, that happens again and again.
To do a little pivot, because there's so much to unpack also from a technical perspective there. You mentioned sort of like the orchestration of resources, um, and what are some? I want to ask you of some of the problems, I guess. There, we talked about it before we started the show earlier, which is let's say you provide compute for AI models in a decentralized, trustless way. So let's say I can provide compute with my laptop at home, and perhaps through my camera is being strange.
Yeah,
Um,
a little moving around.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I'll give you an example of this. So Google built out a lot of systems based around distributed computation frameworks for their data centers, for their own internal systems. And then one of the architects that they built was a system called Hadoop, which allowed you to, solve certain kinds of problems in a distributed architecture very easily and provide interfaces doing that. Up until that point, certain kinds of distributed systems were hard to build and certain applications were hard to build. But that innovation, that software capability, and that interface allowed a lot of things to be built much more easily, which then led to Google Sheets, Google, the documents and so on, those collaboration frameworks, which when you look at how they work, that capability of some real-time collaboration across different systems, which are then running on different instances of the hardware, um, that was science fiction for a while. There was like, you just can't do that. And then all of a sudden you could. So with that analogy, if you think today, the the way AI systems are architected, you got the PyTorch, you got the CUDA, you got the H100 architectures. These are kind of the sort of the simple versions of parts of the stack. How do you take that and put that across the distributed architecture? Distributed only, first of all, meaning like it's not on an H100 cluster, it's on 5 H100 clusters, connected over gigabit Ethernet, no InfiniBand. So how do you do that? So that's being done by certain companies, some of the ones we've invested in. And then you say, okay, how do you take that to wide area? And that's why I say it goes from distributed to decentralized. So this is what we think of in crypto environments. So what's the software stack that allows you to do that for training, for inference, for synthetic data generation, for reinforcement learning architectures? Are there different new opportunities with test time compute and DeepSeek style of improving models? And I think the answer is yes. But in order to take advantage of that in a decentralized or distributed way, you need new software stacks to make that work. So I think that's where a lot of the opportunity, as we see it, is in this sort of the stack of software that allows you to do and take advantage of different kinds of computation and different kinds of computation that are at different layers of this continuum I've been talking about, all the way through to the idea that you're going to run some of your models locally, and Apple has a version of this already with this Apple Intelligence, where some of the intelligence can optionally be offloaded to a larger model in the cloud.
Right. Let's go to the decentralized paradigm, right? So let's say it's trustless, like anyone can now provide the compute for, let's say, running an AI model, running the inference on their GPU. But we talked about this earlier. There's two problems, which is privacy and verifiability. So how do I make sure that the data stays private? So this GPU provider doesn't like read sensitive patient data or whatever, if you have like enterprises running the inference, for example, which we do, as we talked about Oda AI, where I'm head of Web3, and we do kind of provide compute in a decentralized way for AI inference. So if you have these sensitive cases, there's no way they would use that compute if they can't have credible guarantees that the data is handled privately. And then the other thing is verifiability, in terms of how can we be sure that this GPU provider actually ran the correct model that the user was expecting him to run, and he's not just giving you some artificial output and basically bullshitting, and then getting still rewarded for allegedly providing the correct output. These are two at least that I'm aware of, and I'm keen to hear your view on that. And I know there's different solutions with different trade-offs. Like you couldn't use trusted execution environments, which is like an on a hardware level a secure box or a separated element, so you wouldn't essentially be able to look in there, and then it could have a cryptographic signing where it's kind of attests to the computation having been done the way that the user expected. You have like zero knowledge proofs and I think fully homomorphic encryption. But as far as I have heard and am aware, those can be very computationally intense and expensive and slowed. And so it wouldn't be feasible from an economic perspective to use those solutions yet. So yeah, just that's the general.
Yeah, no, I agree that there's a number of problems that you have to solve when you move to fully trustless environments in order to make it trusted. And we have investments in a number of these areas on the provability of models, like whether or not a particular model was run. There's a company called Hellas, like the Greek name for Greece, HELLAS .ai, and they're working on that area. That's one of our first investments. And then Fairmath is working on the fully homomorphic encryption on a very very innovative open source approach. And so, yeah, I think that is part of the challenge is how do you ensure you have models that are built on the data that you think they're built on, that are the models that you're executing, that you believe are the ones that are being executed rather than just some other output that you fake, right? Um, and I think these challenges when you come out to a decentralized environment will be very real. Until those challenges are well um, executed and solved, I think that we will see some resistance to moving to a more decentralized framework, and you will see. Um, I use the distinction distributed or decentralized, right? So distributed means it's kind of like in a sort of a trusted stack, right? So we had this meme running around last year, which was like, crypto is the obvious thing for AI because agents aren't going to have bank accounts. And I was like, well, yeah, but they can have Stripe accounts. Because if you have problems of trusting a fully decentralized system, then I'm happy to have just a distributed system which is not fully decentralized. And yes, I know it's owned, and yes, I know there's permission components, etc. And we're running off Stripe, and we'll all have to use the same thing, and so on and so forth. But that's where you have consortiums, and that's where you have standards, and that's where you have like agreed upon, frameworks that you use. Um, and those things just work. And there are challenges with them, and there are issues with them, and there's definitely like philosophical issues with them. But um, one of the challenges we have as we look to, especially people who are looking kind of for this intersection of crypto and AI, which was a big thing for like a year or so. I think those are somewhat mistaken in their motivation. I think that the really interesting, and I'll just repeat it again, but the really interesting area is trying to figure out how you provide this software stack for the more decentralized frameworks, and what are the advantages you get in those scenarios. I'll change tack very slightly. So one of the real opportunities I see is very timely, which is what's happening right now in the markets. And so, not to get political on this, because people have their own opinions on what's right or wrong, but in the kind of movement to not make America great again, but make America 80s again, which I was just tweeting about, in the sense that there's this kind of like nostalgia to what the 80s were like, and the tariffs, and lots of things happening at home and so on. What this is doing, and I think will continue to do, even if it stops, is it's going to have a very sharp filling effect on investment in AI. Not demand for AI, because that just seems exponential at this point, and people are just going crazy for it. But the amount that someone's willing to invest in it, say from a corporate environment, the Fortune 500 companies, like, oh, you know what, this AI thing, I just need to cut the budget. I need to cut the budget on everything because all my costs just went up. And even if that gets changed, then everyone's freaking out because no one knows what the next 4-8 years are. Just it's uncertain, right? The world just got really uncertain. So the couple of times this happened before. So 99, 2000, I was then working in a startup. We sold a startup to Sun, and I watched Sun Microsystems, which sold incredible hardware and software, go from dominating the industry for like internet compute systems to being like really like an afterthought, because over the course of like quite a long period of time, but it happened again and again each year. It just got worse because the development of commodity hardware, open source software, primarily open source software built into data centers, that was becoming possible. But all of a sudden, the budget that people had went to, just got crushed, right? So they just looked around for cheaper ways to do things, and they found the cheaper way to do things, which was the commodity hardware. Second time this happened was in the 2008 period, so after the Great Financial Crisis. At that point, people said, I need to cut my IT budget again. What are the options? It's like, oh, there's this cloud thing. There's no upfront cost. It's kind of like pay as you go, and they're like, I don't want that. Like, I like my data center. I want to go touch my machine. And I like having that guy, George, who does my data center stuff. I know him. What is this cloud thing? It sucks. And I'm not going to do that. But then, they come back like a couple of weeks later and they're like, you know what, my IT, my CEO says I've just got to cut costs. So we're going to try this cloud thing. So they hold their nose and they do the cloud thing, and then they love it. And so we have this same moment again, I believe, which is, it's not like we have like the AI crash. It's not like the demand for AI is suddenly going to go away, but the budget for almost everything is going to get compressed. And then we're going to see this moment where the stuff that you're working on and the stuff that I'm investing in will suddenly see that be a bright shining light, because it's just cheaper, more cost effective to use these kind of architectures, and people will find a way to fill some of the gaps we've been talking about. They'll find a way to get that software to work. They'll invest in the things that allow you to do more distributed systems, more distributed training, and then decentralized architectures as well. Because people want this stuff. There's a massive demand. Like I don't know what I'd do without AI now. Like I'm so addicted, right? And so we want it, but it's too expensive. And they just tore the checkbook up. So we got to fix that.
Okay. I'm wondering if I'm framing this right. Do constraints play a role here in that framework you just said? Like that there be more constraints, so the breakthroughs will become sort of more creative.
So like DeepSeek's an example, right? If you put constraints or tariffs or not tariffs, but sanctions on the ability to use certain compute or get certain compute, um, or get access to certain models, then you'll find a way around it, right? And we're seeing this now with China developing their own lithography techniques and trying to replicate what's happening in Taiwan without having to use that. Uh, you see that creativity kick in.
Yeah, and you're seeing open source models get smaller, or no? I mean, you're seeing them become more performant with less billion parameters. Is that a trend you think will continue? And then how do we put this in context with the huge data centers being built by XAI and other players?
So there's a lot of these kind of ideas that go back to the late 1890s, when the price for coal dropped and suddenly the demand for coal kicks up. So there's a lot of talk around that, is that when price of resource goes down, increase the resource. Um, and we saw that with the amount of compute that happens at inference now is much, much larger, because these reasoning models and test time compute, they loop, right? So it's like asking itself all these different things and planning and executing as the amount of computation it's using is going up. Um, I've had this thing where I talk about the AI. From up until a couple of years ago, AI was very much like this Tower of Babel. Like we're just kind of building and building and building and building, trying to find God, and we just keep building the same thing. Finally we find God, and then the return's infinite, so you just keep going, right? And that's very much OpenAI's and Anthropic and other people's XAI's business model. Is just, you know what, the return's infinite if we get to super intelligence, and you'll be the first in line because you're investing in it, I guess. And therefore, let's do it. So I think that the model space, the algorithm space, has so much dimensionality to explore still. And I think what you're seeing with these smaller weight models, with these different approaches, DeepSeek's one version, mixed trials another version, liquid AI, there's a bunch of these different kinds of models that are all starting to pop up in small ways and get some traction. Um, People are saying, hey, I wonder if I can do X with Y, a little bit different, or a different kind of approach, or maybe I can use data in a different way, or maybe I don't need as much data, or maybe I don't have many parameters. And I think that trend of trying to find something new and trying to explore the boundaries of this research space that gives us the ability to build intelligence will keep going. I think that's an ongoing trend that I think will become more and more important.
Mm. 5 years from now, what do you think will feel obvious in hindsight in AI?
Uh, um, I think the use of different kinds of compute will seem obvious. That I think we will still see these mega superclusters, but I think they'll be like kind of like sovereign wealth things. And that's where you stick a whole bunch of compute. Each country invests a ton in compute, and they just have that thing. But for a lot of other applications and a lot of things that just get built by developers or are spun up quickly, there'll be many more varieties of compute that you can use.
Did you mean sovereign wealth now in terms of for countries? It will be like a resource of
It'll be an asset.
national security or
National importance.
compute.
Yep.
Interesting.
And I think that countries will, and when you say countries, I also mean states, which also mean entities. I mean corporations. That you'll think of these things as, there's many companies in the world that are much larger than many countries. So think of it like, you pour all your knowledge into that, you pour all your data, you pour all tons of resources into it, and you use it for planning, for trying to figure things out, things that you need for your country, things that you need for your company. Those things make sense to me to be like fortresses. You don't want those things distributed, right? I'm just gonna lock the doors, right? And I'm gonna invest and invest and invest into making that thing work better and better and better. But other systems, I think, will have much more creative ways that the computers use.
Upstream of that would be energy, though, right? Like energy could be a bottleneck to that. So
Yeah, we're gonna be building tons and tons of nuclear. That's what I think is gonna happen. I think everyone's finally gonna wake up and realize that the anti-nuclear, sorry, you're in Germany, but the anti-nuclear green movement was actually a bad idea. And we're going to invest more and more into making nuclear fission safer and more manageable and smaller compute plants. Like reactors that just work for one particular data center. Maybe we get fusion. I don't know. Maybe the AI helps us get there.
in a way, we kind of said, hey, let's stop the growth of knowledge in this field. It's bad. Let's stop thinking about it. Let's stop solving problems, right?
My dad worked on nuclear fission technology, and on the electronics and software side of it in the like the 1960s and 70s, and it was like one of the big startup areas. Like people were just going crazy for it. Everyone was trying to figure it out. It was kind of, and then we had a couple of accidents and a couple of people push against it, and some countries went with us, some countries didn't. Like France has got a very healthy nuclear industry, but again, we haven't had a lot of innovation in it recently, until actually quite recently. So that's starting to change.
Yeah, what I was trying to point to is, I mean, one shouldn't end the process of error correction, I think. I think it's a fair moral basis to say the system that preserves error correction better than another system is essentially better for humans. For example, China is creating reactors that cannot have a meltdown, right? They have like different. I think the cooling is not based on water or something like that. So basically, what I'm trying to say, I think they're solving problems to make it safer.
Yeah, the popular one is if we can put a reactor in a submarine and stick it underwater for years at a time. How is that safe? And yet we can't do the same for a data center. That's how people are sort of rationalized in their heads as to why this should be. Nuclear powered submarines are totally realistic and considered a national resource, and yet we can't develop decent reactors on ground.
Right.
So my dog is sad. Let me just grab him.
I think a cat as well.
No, it's a dog. It's a Shiba. It's one of these
cool.
things. She wants to come say hi, so we'll have a little appearance.
Yeah.
Um,
Bring the dog in. Oh my god.
There's two of these. There's one other one down there. This is a really needy one. This is Bella. This is Bella.
This reminds me, I went for a walk in the park nearby to our house with my wife, and the most random thing, like this is not a common thing to see in that park. It was full of Shiba Inus.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Like
it was some. It must have been a
Shiba
meetup.
party. Yeah, Shiba meetup. Yeah, they're pretty special and rare. This is your first time on camera, baby. You want to say hi? Yeah, hi, cool. You want to say hi, cool?
There you go. Teach Me
Peace
DeFi
out.
podcast featuring Steven and Bella.
Bella, yeah.
So, I mean, another thing that always strikes me at crazy and overwhelming is like the pace at which progress and development is happening in AI. I don't know, you feel like you go on X and then you see someone reporting again a new model that has been trained more efficiently or whatever breakthrough in a video generation model. It keeps happening like almost daily. So how do you keep up with it, you personally? And I assume there's also a lot of noise. So how do you sort of keep on track with the meaningful stuff and filter the noise out?
I read a lot. I spend a lot of time on Twitter. um, I talk to people I know who are very smart. These same things everyone does. Uh, and I mean, I've been through a lot of periods of crazy innovation and growth. So you start to get good at kind of staying calm when everything else feels crazy. Try to remember I think it's important to try to enunciate, to explain the way you're thinking. Like I appreciate times like this to chat to people like yourself who are well informed and who also ask the hard questions. And then I get a chance to talk about this in public, and then people get a chance to come back at me and like, please, if someone's got something to say to me about this, like, let's get in touch. Let's have a debate and down. I think that's how we learn, and that's how we advance the thinking process forwards. And um, that's always been my like. There's a lot of reasons to do startups and VC and research and all these different kinds of areas, but the thing that gets people really going though is just this sort of search for new ideas, search for the new innovations, and moving the kind of the progress forwards. Um, and that happens a lot through debate, through conversation, through the exchange of ideas, the disagreement, the learning something new, staying open to new ideas, not being too attached to, like, you have to, as an investor, you have to be attached to a thesis because you're trying to present it to people and you're saying, hey, invest in me because I've got this idea, and this is the way I think, and I'm the guy who does X. So you should it's decentralized AI, come to me because I've got the ideas. But at the same time, I'm humble and I'm fascinated by what people are telling me and what they're doing, and trying to understand. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. Like, what can I learn from you? So you're on the one hand spending a lot of time at the front lines talking to the early stage startups and the new researchers and people doing it. On the other hand, you're trying to understand where the really the sharp edge of the industry is going, right? What's the latest research? Who's thinking what way? But then you're also trying to think through, well, what are the problems that are going to come up through this approach? Like, just because everyone's doing something doesn't mean that that's the right thing to do. Just because everyone's charging off in one direction and doing, I think the thing that really got me, and I think that helped us raise was Nazare is we've raised some money and we're ongoing with that. But the thing that really kind of triggered us was when Ilya, former from OpenAI, raised $1 billion for his seed round, and I was just like, wait, what? Like, I get it that kind of like XAI can raise what it raised because they have the Twitter data, but you can raise $1 billion like for your first round. That's just insane. I mean, first of all, like, wow, congratulations, that's incredible. But secondly, like, how does that make sense? And the fact that we need that, because it's all going to hardware, most going to hardware. Like, you need that level of investment in hardware to do something. Um, no, it just seems very distorted.
Right. Perhaps this leads me to this question then. Like, what's the most overhyped idea in AI at the moment?
I think agents are overhyped. There you go. That's some controversy for you. Um, I think agents are are both overhyped and underhyped. They're like overhyped short term and underhyped long term. I think they will be fundamentally transformative to the way that companies operate in the long term. But currently, they're not gonna live up to their promise, and I think that's gonna be one of our, like, trust or disillusionment. People are gonna be like, "You know what? This thing just doesn't really work. It doesn't really do what I want it to do. It doesn't quite." It's like not. It's like it's the uncanny valley of the Android, right? It's just like, like, it's not quite good enough. Um, and then I think they'll get there quite quickly, but this next year or two, I think we may see some people questioning. Um, I think we saw that very briefly in the Web3 agent hype that lasted very short period of time, and then flamed out. Everyone was like, "It's like, oh, there's this thing that tweets." It's like, great. Okay, it makes other things that tweet. It's like, okay, why did I want something that tweeted in the first place? Oh, well, now there's a coin for that thing that tweets. It's like, okay, but hang on, let me go back. Why do I want something that tweets? Oh, but it's autonomous. It's like, why do I want it to be autonomous? Oh, but like you don't have to trust it. It's like, hang on a second, you just made a thing that tweets that I can't trust because it's autonomous now. That's a terrible idea. Why? But it makes more versions of itself. Like, okay, stop me when this makes sense. I just stopped on this. I suddenly stopped understanding it. And I think that, the ELIZA framework is fascinating, and I love how fast that grew, and I love the fact that, from the Web3 side, we built something that was, you know, competitive and interesting compared to line chain and other versions in the traditional AI space. But sometimes people just don't stop soon enough and ask why it's useful or what problem it's solving. Um, and they will be important. So systems that, for example, maintain a relationship and a communication with an audience will be useful, but just tweeting a bunch of random stuff isn't helpful currently because we already have so much random stuff. There's so much stuff on the timeline that's just chaotic and nonsense at this point.
Yeah, that's true. You feel like that happens often with trends, though? I mean, I remember the last one was Metaverse. I don't know what happened to that.
Yeah, it happens. It always happens. This is the nature of the evolution of technology and ideas. Um, Crypto is very good at blowing things up very quickly. Without a product market fit because we're very often able to bring capital to memetics before. I mean, meme coins are the best example of this. There's zero substance, explicitly zero substance. It's the most honest thing we've ever done in crypto because we are explicitly saying there's no value to this. We promise to build nothing. It's a nothing coin. Like, we will do nothing, right? They're very honest, but that's the best example of this problem where you can bring a lot of capital to work for something that may not be living up to anything yet. And traditional venture capital does this too. So the value will go around and suddenly get excited and say, "Oh wow, enterprise agents are the hot thing," and they are. And so everyone goes after that, or test time compute, let's go after that, or let's go after these. And so there's like these hot spots of ideas that get invested in, and there's like 5 companies all of a sudden that suddenly exist when you've never even heard this in one idea, but sure, they're all doing it. Um, with with crypto, we do it more visibly. These things are liquid assets very quickly. Um, but yeah, that concept of you know things reaching the sort of trough of disillusionment, the peak of despair, the over exuberance, all these kind of different parts of the cycle. It's happening all the time. People, often people say to me like, "How do you invest when you don't know what part of the cycle you're in?" And I'm like, "Which cycle? Like, which one are you talking about?" Because there's cycles all the time. There's like there's a broader cycle. We're now feeling, what's the date? Like just April 7th, we're feeling the 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 larger cycle imposing itself upon us all, right? And that takes everything out. And and underneath that, there's an AI cycle, and there's a cryptocurrency cycle, and then within each of those, there's other things happening. And so you can sort of slice these things. And if you zoom out completely, you'll still see this incredible change to society that's being affected by technology and innovation. It's like on much longer timescale.
Right. So just build
the solution to the problem you find interesting whenever.
Yeah, exactly. You got to try and find the things that make sense, and that's what I was talking about. Going back to my original training and doing my PhD was trying to find something that like I was really lucky. I was just doing a master's thesis. I didn't even know I was going to PhD, but in my master's thesis, my advisor said, "Yeah, check out this paper. It's just been published. It's on mixtures of experts." And I was like, "Okay." So I tried this thing out, and it was a way of building neural networks rather than one big neural network. You had like a series of smaller neural networks, which then got combined by another neural network and this kind of mixtures of experts architecture. Now, that turned out to be a really hot idea to go research. It wasn't my idea to go research. It was his idea, but I, chose to work with him. And then I said, okay, fine, I'll go do it. And I then put the energy into that. That became a PhD. Lots of papers later, I was sort of able to, get a PhD in this one area. 20 plus years later, that architecture, not thanks to me, because I didn't do anything after that with it, like 2 years later, a little bit, but that architecture is then now being used in Mixtral, in GPT-4, etc. So I was lucky enough to sort of hit on something that kind of became useful in the end. I didn't get anything for it except cred, I guess. But that thinking process when it comes to startups or investing is to say, well, what's the problem people are having? How can I solve it? What's available today? How do I find people that care about this? How do I find people find this interesting? How can I get investment for that? What's the mimetic value of this thing? Like, how do I like, kind of unpack all those things? And there's different skills within all these questions and areas. But it fundamentally comes down to solving something that people find useful and also an area that you think is interesting to work in. Because if you don't think it's interesting, you're going to get bored fast and then it'll feel like work, and then you won't want to do it.
Super interesting. Stephen, thank you so much. Very insightful conversation. I'm glad we chatted. To be honest, I hope we covered some ground that you found interesting.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And yeah, I think we'll put a link in the show notes to Nazare if people want to ride the wave with you.
Yeah, let's go.
Pun intended.
Or like or just chat, give me feedback on what we're talking about here. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.